Hello and welcome to a special interview. I do a lot of backstage with Boria interviews with players and athletes and people like that. But here's one person who I've known for a long time from his stint with the Indian cricket team, which led to our World Cup victory in 2011. Got to know him better and started appreciating the work that he does, the depth, the deep dive, the understanding, and since then have learned quite a bit from the work that Paddy Upton has done. So it gives me a lot of joy and privilege to get him on the show today to try and deep dive on a couple of things. He's now helping the Indian hockey team going into Paris. He's worked with cricketers, including the likes of Virat Kohli, which Virat talked about last November. So, Paddy Upton, welcome back home in Cape Town after being with the Indian team in Australia. First question. The series did not go our way in Australia. Are you worried? Is there a mental issue? Because the country clearly will want to see Tokyo repeated, if not bettered, in Paris because hockey is massive in our country. You've been working with the team now for a while. So, what are your first thoughts? What are the concerns? How do we get better?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me into this conversation, Boria. Nice to see you and chat to you again. Yes, so the trip to Australia was for a 5-match test series with the Indian men's hockey team against Australia, and it was part of the Olympic preparation. So it was very specifically chosen by the two coaches of those two teams because each felt that they could learn something from the other in the Olympic journey. So the fact that it didn't go well and India lost 5-0 in the series is obviously not a good result, but it's not a huge cause for concern, not for myself, not for the coaches, probably only for the fans, because the idea was to go there to try some different combinations. And in hockey, unlike cricket, particularly on an Olympic journey like we're on now, you don't want to play all of your best players. You don't want to show all of your main moves. You don't want to show all of your defensive moves. You don't want to show, for example, all of your penalty corner attacking moves. So it's a very fine balance that the coach needs to play between playing the best team, for example, against a team like Australia, versus trying different combinations, younger players, inexperienced players, to see how they shape up in this kind of game. Um, Test ourselves, but also not show Australia everything that we have got to offer. So certainly there is a lot more and some better combinations and some things that we didn't bring to the table in Australia that we will bring to the table in Paris. So it was an important part of the learning journey. We certainly learned a whole lot, and I think the team is better off for it.
Your specific work, Paddy, because again, I mean, when I speak to the cricketers, whether it's 2011, whether it's beyond that, your work, I mean, a lot of people have told me they've benefited from the inputs that you have given. With your work with Harmanpreet and the team there, can you specifically just get me into the mental conditioning stuff that you are doing with them and your specific kind of work, and what has your experience been so far?
So, I mean, Barry, that's a very broad question, very nuanced, and there's a lot of answers. But I would say the gist of the work that I've been doing is number one, to create a winning, attacking, warrior, Indian tiger like mindset for individuals and the team that also aligns and is unique to them and their personalities. So we're wanting to find that attacking front foot, don't back down for anybody, real clarity of focus mindset. And that becomes particularly important, that mindset, when there's distractions, when things go against us, when we 3-1 down at a halftime, where refereeing decision goes against us, or we get a card and down to 10 players. That's the time where everyone really needs to step up into their absolute best self. So that's one of the things that we're looking to do. Another is to, as with every team I've worked with, to try and find a higher purpose or a greater cause for which each individual and the team plays. And that really is beneficial when you get under real pressure personally. If you're playing for a reason greater than yourself, it becomes even easier to find that as a well of inspiration from within and remain focused on the task at hand, because it's not just about me. And then at the same time, it's also, I'm a very big believer in sport is just one part of life, is
Yeah.
that I want to create mentally focused, in control athletes, but also help people to become good human beings. And that involves separating out who am I as a person and what do I do as a hockey player or a cricketer or whatever it might be. And those are two different things. And the more we're grounded in who I am as a person, then we're not as attached to results, particularly not as attached, no desperation to win. We want to win, but we're not desperate. We don't want to do badly, but we're not terrified, because the desperation to win, it directly causes pressure. The fear of losing or doing badly or getting dropped or disappointing people creates anxiety and fear, and pressure and fear are two of the biggest mental obstacles to success. And generally that happens because an individual attaches their self-worth to their results, and I want to separate those out.
Two parts. One, I mean, I asked the question because I was having a chat with Craig Fulton, for example, and he said, in fact, even the players told me that ahead of the Asian Champions Trophy last year, the coach had given them situations saying, you might well be 2-0 down. And they were prepared for such situations, which actually happened in the final and thereafter. So Harmanpreet and the boys were like, look, we were geared for adversity. So it did not come to us as a surprise, and we were able to deliver. So that's the reason I asked you that specific question. The second thing is, someone like an Abhinav Bindra, for example, tells us every day that, Olympic stage will be about pressure. And the first step to dealing with pressure is acceptance. That, okay, there will be pressure, and you can't just say, oh, it's just another game, just another competition. No, it's not. It's the Olympic Games, and there will be pressure. So there has to be acceptance. There has to be mindfulness. And only if we are mindful and accept that pressure can we then deal with pressure. If I take Tokyo, many of our athletes, badminton players, shooters mostly, tremendous talent, went there and did not do well because we were not able to deal with the pressure. That's exactly what your expertise is. Yes, I know you're doing hockey, but if Indian government, Indian federations, Indian Olympic Association ask you to help out with these athletes, will you be there? And what are your thoughts generally about our athletes dealing with pressure?
So the answer is yes. I mean, I love helping people step up, and particularly in those really important high pressure big moments. And almost always, the difference between performance at an Olympics doesn't boil down to talent. It doesn't boil down to preparation. It doesn't boil down to strategy. It doesn't come down to how good your coach is. It comes down to how well do you manage yourself in those high pressure key moments. And manage yourself means, number one, recognize that this is one of those moments. It might be a moment in a game or an actual game, a qualifier. Number two, to recognize that moment and my thinking, and there will be distractions, there will be pressures, there will be noise, there will be unforeseen things happening, but can you remain focused on task regardless of the size of the occasion or the impact or whatever it is that's going on around you that tends to distract most or the average athletes? And in fact, there's amazing statistic that came out of the 2012 Olympics in the UK that it wasn't widely publicized, but in the British Olympic team across all sports, in that Olympics, of all British athletes, only 20% of them achieved their season's best at the Olympics. Now, that's a season, that's 1 year. They've trained for 4 years, and only 20% have got their season's best. The other 80% haven't even delivered at a level that they've delivered across that season. And that purely points to the size of the occasion, got 80% of athletes to fall away from just their season's best, not even their Olympic best. So it's just an illustration of how big the occasion is. And you're quite right. One needs to accept the occasion, number one, and acceptance isn't enough. It's a start. And the other thing that, as I said, it's what I really believe in deeply, is that the more secure I am within who I am as a person, separate from my results, the less pressure we will suffer, the less fear we will suffer. Because the reality, Boria, is there is no such thing as pressure. It's a concept that we create for ourselves inside our own mind as a result of our own thinking. Pressure is that, and fear is that. So we create it for ourselves, and there's a whole reason, a whole lot of mechanics and dynamics that we end up doing that to ourselves. And one of the most powerful and long-lasting ways to prevent fear from really gripping us, or pressure from really gripping us, is, as I said, to know that I am okay who I am as a person, whether I do well, I want to do well, I don't want it to do badly, but I'm not desperate for one or the other, and it starts already reducing the amount of pressure and anxiety we feel.
So, see, for example, if I take one individual athlete, take a shooter, there are more than 4 World Cups. There's world championship every year. So when I speak to them, and they're young people, 18, 19, 17, and they're like, look, when I'm at a world championship or a World Cup, I know at the back of my mind that if I fail today, 1 month later, I get another chance. And I know I can do better. I'm good at training. I'm good at whatever. But the moment I go to an Olympic Games, and I'm like, for the next 4 years, I will not get this anymore. And that gets to me. That for 4 years, I've trained for 4 years for this platform, and now I'm here. If I mess up here, I'm done for 4 years. And whether or not I will get an opportunity 4 years later, I don't know, because it's a seriously competitive sport. And in my mind, that muddle gets created. And that's what I was wanting to ask you, that word, Olympic Games, is actually pressure. Because otherwise, it's an intangible concept that you and I both know. And that's where the problem starts. How does one, when these are formative minds, 17, 18, 19, 20, these are the kind of people, and we, the media, will impose tremendous amount of expectation on them, saying, hello, you've not delivered in Rio, you've not delivered in Tokyo, now get that elusive medal for India. In such a situation, Paddy, how do these athletes get ready?
So when it comes to the distraction of Olympics, it's not actually the Olympics that's the distraction. It is the desperation to succeed at an Olympics or the fear of not succeeding at Olympics. And both of those are a focus on results. And results either happen at some point in the future or they have happened in the past. And what the focus on results does is it takes us away from what is the process I need to be engaging in order to deliver those results. So it's very difficult for a shooter. You make a good point, because the shooter, it is completely still. They don't have any moving parts around them. They don't have opponents they need to look at. They don't have a ball that they need to track. It's just them. They're focusing on a target and they need to squeeze the trigger. So it's everything is in the mind, and what we call that, it's an internal locus of control. So my focus is inside me, and it's a very narrow locus of control. So it leaves so much room for thoughts to come into my head, compared to, for example, a midfielder in hockey. While the ball is in play, they're watching the ball, they're watching their opponents, they're looking for space, they're watching their own players. There's so much they're paying attention to that it's very difficult for a thought in amongst all of that, for a thought to come into their head. So that's why those sports like shooting, like archery, maybe like climbing on a mountain, there is so much time for thinking to happen and to distract someone. And the biggest distraction for every single one of us, there's a reason why we hear MS Dhoni, one of the best performers under pressure in the history of, or recent history of Indian sport, says time and time again in his post-match and pre-match interviews, we focus on the process, not on the result. And what he's talking about is focusing on facing the ball, one ball at a time, watching the ball, responding to it on merit. And if I do that ball after ball after ball with my game and situation awareness, I have the best possible chance of that result eventually happening. And the Olympics, because of the size of it, it attaches athletes' minds to, I want gold, or I want to podium, and it'll be embarrassing if I don't podium. And then they fixate on that result in the future, and it takes them out of the present moment. Because the reality is, and why does pressure and stress and fear and that those emotions come up in us? It's because we cannot deal with the future. The mind doesn't understand the difference between thought and reality. So we want to win gold, but Olympics is 3 months out or 4 months out. And of course, there's going to be pressure because the brain wants to deliver gold, but the body can't do anything about it now because I'm sitting at my home, I'm training, or I'm being part of some other event. So results take us out of the present and distract us from actually engaging in a task that, if we do that really well and remain undistracted and keep doing it, like hitting the target, watching the ball, that gives us the best possible chance of delivering a result. And in life, we know the same thing. It's the same, one of the most popular sayings, the same as when Dhoni says, focus on the process. Life is a journey. It's about living the journey day to day, moment to moment. It's not a destination. In fact, the destination of life is death. So we don't want to rush to that result.
Let me ask you a final one. I mean, you mentioned cricket, you mentioned Dhoni, you worked with Virat. Virat publicly said that during last World Cup. This has always been the case for the last 12 years, right? 13 years that, oh, we don't win ICC competitions. Oh, there's a 2019. Oh, there's a 2023 now. Something happens to the Indian team, semifinals, finals. These are great people. Virat Kohli, world's greatest batsman. Rohit Sharma, world's greatest batter. I mean, it's a very good team, but something happens. I mean, you worked with these athletes. Have you been able to pinpoint? Have you been able to decode what's going wrong? Is there an answer, or it's sport is about losing? It teaches us how to lose, and obviously we will keep getting better. But have you been being a part of the Indian cricketing ecosystem as coach, as high performance analyst, man, whatever? You've done every role. Have you been able to figure out what goes wrong in knockout situations, in difficult circumstances, in high pressure situations for the Indian team?
There are quite a few things. The one that would probably stand out as you're asking the question, Boria, is young people. So most athletes are younger people. Most younger people the world over tend to be quite influenced by the world around them. What happens in social media, compliments, criticism, what the coach says, what the fan says, what they read in the media, what other people are wearing, how they're dressing, how they're speaking. Young people learn from being influenced from the outside. As we mature, we become less and less influenced by the outside, and we start having our own barometer, our own navigator, our own compass, and we make our own decisions for ourselves. The Indians, because there is such fanaticism around sport, there is even more noise around sports in the media, from the fans, in social media, that Indian players experience compared to athletes from most other countries that don't have that same level of fanaticism or amount of fanatical supporters. So the external influence on Indian, particularly cricketers, hockey players, or Olympians, is so much greater than athletes from other nations. So they have to work that much harder to be less influenced by the noise, by the expectations. I mean, it's amazing. India is the only place I've ever worked, and I've worked in a number of countries around the world in 13 different sports at the highest level. India, it tops it when it comes to athletes' friends saying, you have to do well, you have to win, you have to score 100, you have to get a trophy. Families say that to them. There's no other country where athletes have their friends placing so much pressure on the athlete to do well, and have their family put so much pressure and so invested. So it's easier to fade out the noise of fans who you don't know, who don't have a face, and they may be just a comment on your social media profile. But fans do it. And sometimes even coaches and IPL owners come in and they say, you have to win, it's so important. And that external focus on results, the more a player takes that on inside themselves, the more the pressure, the more the fear. And that's probably my biggest body of work, I would say, that I would do with Indian athletes, is to try and become more internally focused, be your own person, and fade. That noise is always going to be there, and try and treat it like the music in a restaurant when you're sitting with your partner, having a conversation. You want to be paying attention to what they're saying, or an athlete wants to be paying attention to the game that's unfolding in front of them. And there is music in this restaurant. Like in sport, there is noise, but we want it to be background noise, that it's happening, it's there, but we're not focusing on it. We're focusing on what's right in front of us, in the restaurant, talking to our partner, on the sports field, focus on the job at hand. That noise is loudest in an Indian context than in any other country in the world. So most difficult to fade into the background.
Fascinating conversation, deep dive, as I said. Always a pleasure to pick your brains, because clearly this is something that all of us have tried to put our hands on as analysts, as scholars of the sport, or as scholars of sport in general, trying to understand the Indian sporting ecosystem. But Paddy, as I said, you've worked in multiple different countries. You have that experience to try and compare and give us some answers, which you did. This is an ongoing subject of discussion and debate, and further discussion is needed. But for the moment, I mean, thank you very, very, very much for giving me time. I know you've traveled back at short notice doing this for me. Privileged to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Boria. Lovely chatting to you as always.